Same old game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for March 11th, 2025, and I'm Jaden Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. Brendan, welcome to Earth. Welcome to Earth. Welcome to Earth.
I don't know. I always felt like I'd be more of a satellite. I don't know.
You're less of a buoy, more of a satellite guy?
That's a fun question to ask people. That's a great conversation starter, right? Are you more buoy or are you more satellite?
Yeah, I'm not in the dating scene anymore, obviously, but if I was, that would be the first question I would ask someone. Are you a buoy or a satellite? And depending on the answer, then you'll know.
Man, I hope this film becomes a huge hit now because I want to see if that pops up on people's dating profiles now.
Exactly. Imagine people scrolling through Tinder and then just labeling buoy, satellite, and you just kind of swipe depending.
I'm with you that I haven't been in the dating scene for quite some time as well, but I do know that there are some apps out there that are very prompt specific that actually engage conversation between two people via prompts. I would love if one of those prompts ended up being, are you more buoy or are you more satellite?
Are you buoy or satellite? And look, if you're confused as to what Brendan and I are talking about, you're not alone. You're not alone. So we are here to talk about the new film from Sam and Andy Zuchero in Love Me. And it is about, I guess, to reveal the synopsis, it is a romance between a buoy and a satellite. I am not making that up. You did not hear me wrong. It is a love story between a buoy. Yes, you are thinking correct when you hear me say the word
not
buoy.
A play on words. It's not a slang term for something else.
It's an actual buoy and an actual satellite. A romance between a buoy and a satellite. That is what this movie is. So immediately laying the groundwork for how strange this film is. And as if that isn't weird enough, the buoy is played by Kristen Stewart. The satellite is played by Steven Yeun. Again, going back to our theme of the week, our double feature, Mickey 17, Love Me, Steven Yeun, co-starring in both with the Pattinson-Stewart combo. We are now to the second half of that combo.
Yeah. Wasn't there a weird romance in Okja as well? So I feel like he's now 3 for 3 when it comes to quirky sci-fi romance weirdness, Steven Yeun specifically. I don't know. I think this is going to be a new trend for him. I think these are the only movies he should do going forward.
Yeah. And look, as if the buoy satellite romance isn't weird enough, they're portrayed by Stewart and Yeun respectively. This film is also an animated movie, sort of. It's live action. It's animated. It's weird.
This is
an enigma of a movie.
It's not even just the fact that it is partially animated, to your point. It's the choice and style of animation that we're also going to talk about.
Yeah. Yep. This film makes choices. There's no doubt about it. It makes choices. For better or worse.
We've talked about this. Yeah. We're not playing our cards too early, I hope, but we like movies when they make choices. Just the simple gesture of directors making choices. We like that.
Absolutely. All right. With that said, shall we get into this? This is the directorial debut for the Zuchero, so we don't really have any sort of context as far as their filmmaking goes.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we'll just go ahead and jump into it. So, and look, there's really not a lot involved here, right? It is written and directed by Sam and Andy Zuchero, and it stars Kristen Stewart and Steven Yeun, and that is it. They are literally the only cast members here.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not familiar with Love Me, and a lot of you probably aren't, I will say this is the fun of doing this aside from the pairing to Mickey 17. I'm excited to get into this, not just because of the weirdness of this film, but boy, that alone has me ready to go. But this also is very old school extra film for longtime listeners of our show.
Kind of nostalgia for us.
It is a little nostalgic. We used to cover movies like this all the time and had a great time doing it. So it definitely is taking me back to that space as well.
And we love doing that. We'll still do that from time to time because occasionally we might find some type of diamond in the rough, right?
Yeah.
Not going to say if this movie is a diamond in the rough or like a needle in a haystack or anything like that, but I'm glad we're talking about it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I'm glad it came out when it did, especially because of the week. It worked out extremely well. But that is to say, a lot of you might not be familiar with this film. So, as I noted, the synopsis is it is a post-apocalyptic romance in which a buoy and a satellite meet online and fall in love after the end of the human civilization. Forgot to add that context. After we all died.
Yeah, this is basically a new version fusing WALL-E with the ending of Steven Spielberg's AI in some ways.
No idea how the internet still exists without people, but logic with this film, throw it into the garbage. Okay. As we get into this film, just throw logic away. Just throw it all away. Brendan, what did you think about Love Me?
I don't know. It gets points for ambition.
Okay.
It gets points for ambition. That's really my opening thoughts in a nutshell, right? And I feel like your opening thoughts are going to be very similar to that, just based on how this conversation is going thus far. I'm so glad we're talking about a movie like this. It takes me back to the days of extra film, like you said. And while I love promoting movies like this, even if it ends up being a movie that I'm ultimately kind of mixed on, and this one I am kind of mixed on it. I really don't think it fully works, but as a directorial debut, I respect that a movie like this is taking some narrative swings. It's taking some tonal swings as well. And I appreciate when movies do that. And there are moments where it actually looks pretty interesting. Like it has a visual flair to it that is very, very weird and very strange. It's not conventionally made by any means. And I appreciate that. I don't think it fully works. In fact, I think most of it might not work, honestly. But I think it's an interesting failure. It goes back to what we've talked about many times, JD. We prefer when movies trip and fail over their ambitions as opposed to not taking any swings at all and just churning out safe mediocrity. This is not safe mediocrity at all. It's not. And I do respect the swings that it's taking. We'll certainly go more into what some of its thematic ideas are, especially around the idea of artificiality in our lives, whether it be between literal artificial beings or real life human beings that may mirror artificiality. I think that's certainly a talking point for sure. And I think it's a rightful one and a very pertinent one, especially as social media kind of overtakes our lives in a very artificial way. I think that's interesting. And I think the movie kind of handles it well. I think. Not really sure yet. We'll see where this conversation goes. But yeah, it's an interesting one for sure.
It is very, very strange. I'm honestly not sure what to make of this film either. On one hand, I don't know if it works. It's disjointed narratively. It slips between different worlds that combine the CGI realism of the buoy and satellite to the wonky animation that we see to fully live action with Stephen Yeun and Kristen Stewart on screen. And as you're talking about, I have to give the film credit because I'm not sure I've seen anything like it before in that regard. I mean, it's a love story that spans 13 billion years.
Yeah, it's not a joke.
You heard that right.
It's not hyperbole.
13 billion years. It is the longest love story ever put to film.
That is
and
math.
It features
Math is math.
a scene where a buoy and a satellite have sex with each other. Again, I will say that again. It features a scene where a buoy and a satellite have sex. there is a lot of ambition to this film that you just have to admire, even if it is tedious in places. And that is its biggest problem. The execution is all over the place. All over the place. However, similar to Mickey 17, there is a thematic and emotional underbelly to this film that did move me somehow. I don't know how, but it did move me. And for me, I think it was less about the passing of time. That is certainly a big part of the thematic structure here. And I do kind of love the irony that it's rooted in two pieces of metal who don't understand the passage of time. But for me, it was less about that and more so it's scathing commentary on the artificiality of the lives we live today. The conflict itself is admittedly trite, but there's something about the film's self-loathing, existential dread, and search for singularity that kind of won me over in the end, especially because me, and we should emphasize the characters' names here, are me and I am. The Stuart Bowie character.
I am me.
She goes by
I am
me.
Yeah.
And Stephen Yeun's satellite character goes by I am. So this could get weird in terms of phrasing, but
You got to make sure we don't use those prepositions anymore.
yeah, it's going to get a little strange. But me, the character of me, not me, but the character of me, after a billion years of separation from I am, she continues to cling on to this artificiality she created and remains afraid that he will not accept her as this aging, rusty buoy. The metaphor there, I do find compelling. There's something about it that we see in our culture all the time. It is a big talking point in a lot of the discourse. And I am's desperate pleas for me to just be who she is, something that is not cogent for her at all, even as the sun is approaching to obliterate the both of them. I was moved by it despite how cynical it is all the way up until the end. But I think that cynicism is born out of a real love of what makes humanity great when you remove the veneer of that artificiality. And the fact that it's coming through these characters that in and of itself is technology.
Yeah.
It makes for some interesting irony.
I think that's why I don't think this is necessarily a movie that's clearly broken into two halves, but I did like the second half more than the first half because I feel like that's where those ideas are more realized. I feel like that's where there's more of a understanding of how to convey those ideas, especially within the framework of this strange narrative. I think getting to that point, you're right. It is very messy. It's overly ambitious to the point that it trips over its own ambitions and then becomes very tedious. I think there is a tediousness in how this meet cute, if you want to call it that, is set up. The back and forth between the realistic CGI of this buoy and this satellite and how you juxtapose that with what is essentially Windows 95 animation.
Yeah.
It's
like
that
metaverse
wonky.
Animation. If you've ever been on the metaverse VR,
it's kind of Sims like in a way.
It
too.
is Sims like, yeah.
Yeah, and I get why it looks like that. It doesn't look good, but it's meant to feel and look very fake and very artificial because that is ultimately the point.
That is the point.
And the thematic point that we're making here. But I think in the second half of the film is where the filmmaking duo here of Andy and Sam Zuchero find a way to bring things together in a way that feels more seamless, as if that first half was more set up to get to these points. There is a point where the film almost turns into like this weird pseudo breakup movie. And I think that's the part where I thought, okay, now it's starting to work for me. It started to take itself less seriously. It had this weird kind of quirky sense of humor that was almost self-aware as well. And I feel like that's where things started to come together, which I guess is maybe my way of saying this movie could have been more effective as a short film or maybe just something that was an hour long. I don't know if that first half needed as much setup to get to that point. I'm not really sure. But I do think when it gets to that middle ground, there is there's more of a smoothness that it took just too long to get to. But I do think some of those ideas on artificiality and how we look at things like social media specifically as a way to try to mirror our own lives, because we're almost envious of how people choose to artificially project themselves on social media. I mean, the projections of Kristen Stewart and Stephen Yeun here, they're literally projections that these two individuals, things, buoy in a satellite, whatever you want to call them, they're literally projections of what they took from the internet to try to reflect what they want to feel. It's absolutely fake. It's absolutely fake. Even IM says many times, this is fake. It's all a reenactment. And that's something that happens a lot nowadays. You know, there is something that's kind of disturbing about that idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's where, again, I do find it effective, despite how weird the logic is. It gets really strange in its presentation. Again, I don't think all of that works, but somehow through the chaos, I do think there is a cogency to this film emotionally and thematically as it relates to that commentary, the artificiality that a lot of people tend to present themselves as, because they see others that are living lives that they are allured by, that they want in some sort of way.
Which are usually never real in the first place, too.
Of course. Well, that's the thing with me is that she is a buoy, so she doesn't really know humanity. She can only imitate it, but she does want it in some sort of way, but she's going about it simply through imitation. It is the artificiality of it. But what's interesting about I Am is that he is somehow, despite also being a piece of metal, is able to separate the artificiality from something that can be real. Now, how he's able to make that distinction is not really made clear in the film, and that's where you just have to move logic away from this.
There are massive contrivances here to get to those points. The way that these arcs are formed, even the fact that the buoy, before the buoy becomes known as me, or I guess becomes voiced by Kristen Stewart, almost immediately within seconds of the movie has what seems like this genuine artificial intelligence to it. You kind of just have to accept it. You kind of just have to roll with these contrivances in order for it to work.
It does tell us early on that it is a quote unquote smart buoy.
Oh, okay. So, okay. Solves everything. Solves everything.
Yes. It implies that there is an artificial intelligence, that it is able to think for itself. Again, so much of this also takes place on the internet. I don't know how any of this still functions without human beings. But given what we see with the buoy later on, it's able to quote unquote survive because of the sun. It gets all of its power from the sun. And there is a moment where that is taken away and you see it powers down a little bit. So, that's about the only time in the film where there's some logic kind of built into the mechanics of the movie. But when you strip away the mechanics, despite how the satellite is able to distinguish artificiality from real humanistic, like yearnings, that the character me, is unable to do. Like when you strip away the mechanics, I still like the dynamic at play there, because he does want to yearn for something that is beyond the artificiality. He even says at one point, and we do see it visually, that he isn't good at recreating the Instagram, YouTube manufactured artificiality that me is wanting to recreate.
The "you do you" post is pretty funny. As much as I criticize the first half for being a little tedious, and you said that as well. That dynamic was really good. That part was good.
Yeah, no, I very much enjoyed that as well. Like, there's kind of like an ignorance, there's like a toddler mentality to them early on that I think is interesting. What I find compelling about the dynamic as well is that despite the artificiality, and this is where I do think there are true nuances to this film as it relates to the human condition, because me while she is drawn to the artificiality of a YouTube persona by the name of Deja,
Mm.
she does want something that is real. And that's why she often is abrasive toward I Am when he's not getting it right. Like she wants him to act in the right way, but also wants him to be spontaneous. Like there is something that she's craving. She can't really articulate it. She doesn't know exactly what it is, but there is something beyond the artificiality she wants, but she doesn't know how to break through those artificial walls, if that makes sense. And that I find interesting because I think, like metaphorically speaking, that I think provocatively speaks to why influencer culture is as potent as it is. I think people see something, they yearn for that kind of lifestyle, but at the same time, there is something deeper that is driving those emotions that this film is getting to. So like there is a lostness with me that I like from like emotionally speaking that I think is really great, that is then paralleled narratively when she becomes narratively lost in the shuffle here as well, that I do think is apt to the metaphorical storytelling that is happening with that character as well. So again, despite the messiness of the film, there is something kind of provocative here that, again, I did find myself moved by it despite how disjointed it is.
Because it has real life ramifications. I think that's why it's so easy to be moved by it, especially when someone like you, who's a parent, and you have especially one child right now who is very heavily absorbed by, virtual reality and the digital world, right? It's something you think about, and you want your child to be very aware of those dangers and the artificiality of that. I think part of why it also works too, at least it did for me. I'm with you. I do think it maybe works more than it doesn't. It really works because it is perfectly cast. I don't think this movie works at all with the wrong actors, or at least the actors that aren't able to convey those things you're talking about, because there is this literal yin and yang happening between Kristen Stewart and Steven Yeun. Kristen Stewart, as we've seen throughout her career, she can do it all, but she is very good at the cynical side of things, the bitter side of things. And she plays into that as well. And Steven Yeun's very good at the more tender and sincere side of things. And this movie is trying to have it both ways. It's trying to look at that cynicism and find the realism and the humanity underneath, the whole idea that human connection is really the thing that we have now lost because of this whole overarching influencer culture you're talking about. And me, played by Kristen Stewart, can't break through those barriers. So you have one character essentially representing that cynical side and one representing more of the sincere side. And there is a battle there. I do think maybe one side of that battle maybe is more successful than the other. And maybe it's just because as I get older, I tend to get more cynical. So I kind of think the cynicism of this movie is more effective than the sincerity underneath. But I at least applaud the filmmakers here and this movie for trying to go for both and actually cast it in a way where they represent both opposite ends of that spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, I live my life online a lot as well, partially because of In Session Film. That
we kind of have to,
of it. But my day job, aside from In Session Film, has me online a lot as well. So I live in this world. I see influencer culture up close and personal all of the time. And admittedly, there is a cynicism that comes out of me when I do see a lot of it. I do think it comes from a disingenuous place, but I think on the same token, there is a reason why so many people are drawn to it.
Oh yeah.
Because they see something in other people that they want. What is driving that? This film wants to get to the heart of that. And not only do they want to get to the heart of it, and we've already discussed that a little bit here, but going back to my opening thoughts and the ending of this film, I think it also wants to highlight the extremism of it as well. That's why the cynicism to this film, I do think, is vital because even after, spoiler alert for this film, I guess I'll be vague here, but maybe slight spoilers here. But at the end of this film, after some separation between the two characters, me comes back, has an interaction, and I am is able to give her an experience that she was never able to create for herself earlier. So she's able to drink water and eat ice cream. Why I am is able to reinvent those things, I don't know. Forget logic. That element of the film is weird. But she's able to come back and experience these very human things. And despite that, despite experiencing these things, and also forget the water, forget the ice cream, although that is certainly an interesting element of it, they also have sex. Again, to emphasize that as well. So like they have this intimacy. There's a whole sex sequence in this film. It's wild, between a buoy and a satellite. And she's drinking water and eating ice cream and having all of these human experiences. And despite that, she wants to recreate the Deja wedding and wants to have the baby. Like, she's still clinging to the artificiality even after those experiences, like all the way up until the end, as the sun is approaching and they're about to be obliterated. There's still something that disconnects her from that reality. And again, I think that does speak to the potency and the extremism that comes with the artificiality of being online, and us being drawn to these lives that just don't exist in the real world. Now, ultimately, in the final scenes, and I won't give away what happens in the final scenes, there is a breakthrough finally. But I love that the film is willing to push that as far as it possibly can before breaking those barriers. Because it does speak to, at least what I see in my life, the real world ramifications of that artificiality.
Isn't that such a human trait nowadays, to become victim of that artificiality? And where I think the film is pretty interesting in how it conveys that, and where there is some pretty good nuance here, is when me, the character me, is essentially surfing the web and comes across this, I guess it's an Instagram handle, but they don't use the term Instagram, but the social media handle of Deja and her boyfriend, soon to be fiance and husband, Liam. And they're the real life figures that basically inspire their avatars to become connected with each other. The film never comes out and says that Deja and Liam's life on Instagram or social media or whatever is really that toxic. That doesn't say that their handles are fake or anything like that. It's the fact that me chooses to get self-absorbed by it, which is a very human trait, regardless of, how it comes across. Maybe there is something genuine about the initial social media handle that they're basically using as their avatars, but I think that adds a lot of irony to what makes me and I am so self-absorbed by it, because that is very much a human trait regardless of that. So it's a way for the movie to comment on the dangers of influencer culture without necessarily saying all influencers are guilty of participating in that culture. And I think it's a nice balance.
I mean, I agree. I mean, I don't think influencer culture is defined by them being toxic or doing inappropriate things, although there are stories out there for sure. Not necessarily applicable to everybody, but I think generally influencers have so-called influence because people are alert to them, and they're alert to them because they present themselves in this specific way that, offers this veneer of, look at my perfect life, and isn't everything great?
And the film is aware of that. It's also aware that, there is a big difference between those that are influencers because they want to be influencers, and maybe influencers because they just happen to be content creators that have influence, right? And there's a big difference there.
Yeah, it's not to say that Deja or Liam or the Deja and Liams of the world are bad people. That's not at all what the film is arguing, and that's not what I'm trying to argue either.
Right,
It's
right.
not that those people are bad. They're simply content creators. That's the career path that they have chosen. However, I think as a result of what influencer culture has become, because there's just this inherent artificiality to it, I have to present myself in a specific way that endears people to me, that gets people to watch my videos, whatever the case may be. It's got to be entertaining. It's got
like
to be
reality TV.
insightful. Yeah, exactly. Whatever the case may be, it gets people drawn in, and they also want that thing. But it is fake. There's the whole thing is foundation. The foundation is sand. It's all fake, and that's why Me has a struggle, or why she struggles to capture something that is concrete in those early scenes when she is trying to, they redo that routine that she sees in the YouTube video like 100 times. And part of that is perhaps she does get some joy out of it, but I think also she wants to perfect it and try to get the same joy out of what she sees with Deja in those videos.
Yeah.
But she can't, because it is fake, and also
It is fake. It's not their moment. It was a
it's
past
not their moment, and
Yeah.
cannot connect to it at all. He's terrible at recreating Liam because he's never endeared by the fakery. Like from the beginning, he's only there for me. He's only there for me. He's never there for the artificiality of it, and that creates a disconnect between them.
Sure.
But that to me is where the film using influencer culture, I do think, has true nuances.
I think it's interesting.
The messiness of the film and the logic and how weird it is. But I do think there are true nuances there that are really, really like it wants to get beneath the headline stories, beneath the easy commentary, and what drives like the human condition to want those things, and the cost of clinging to them to the very end, to where you're almost eaten up by the sun.
It's a thematic exercise. It doesn't quite have the narrative backbone to support the movie itself, but I'd rather a failed and interesting thematic exercise than a fairly straightforward movie supporting a potentially interesting exercise that way.
No, I agree.
Yeah. So like even though, like I said in my opening thoughts, I think I'm kind of mixed to positive on the movie. I don't think I'm going to give this more than 3 out of 5 on Letterboxd, but I love that a movie like this exists and it's at least trying for something.
Yeah, I agree. And that's where I sit currently. I'm a 3 out of 5 on Letterboxd for this, because I do think there are really great nuances thematically that are, I think, honestly provocative. When you get behind the facade of the mechanics of the film. But yeah, I mean, from a movie perspective, it is hard to ignore how disjointed it is. The logic of the film just makes no sense whatsoever. How the water comes about, how the ice cream comes about, why any of that takes place here. Like it serves a thematic and emotional perspective. I get why that's there, but aside from that, there are just some weird sequences there.
Yeah.
And the animation, it's just the experience is a bit bizarre. But I think when you move past that, there's a lot to appreciate about the film.
I can defend the intent every step of the way.
100%. Yeah. I agree.
But sometimes that's enough. Like I said, the animation style is very early 90s in a way. It's not very good, but I understand that is probably deliberate to make light of the artificiality that we're seeing on screen and the fakery of it. But to your point earlier, it does get to a point that as a movie, it gets pretty repetitive. It gets very tedious. And it's like, okay, it's like, I got the point.
Yes.
Let's move on to the next thing. And thankfully, like I said, by the time it gets to maybe the back half and especially the final third, it does tighten up a bit. It seems to find whatever its nucleus was always supposed to be. And it also gets kind of funny. There is a very strange sense of humor at times. There's one line of dialogue when the two of them finally reunite and now they're their full avatars, not animated anymore. And I think Me says, "How long have I been gone?" And I Am says, it's been like a billion years. But this time a line like that is actually literal.
It's
but that's
true.
something we use every
Yeah.
day as a hyperbolic kind of sarcastic statement.
Yeah.
And in this case, it actually is literal. It's like, that's really smart. That's playful. That's funny. I kind of
Yeah.
wish maybe the movie had more of that. But that's at least
Yes.
really clever.
I do agree. I wish that it spent a little bit more time fleshing out its sci-fi sauce and why some of this happens, or let some of those comedic gags linger a little bit. But like I did enjoy a lot of this film from moment to moment. I think in a vacuum there are individual scenes, pockets that are compelling. It's on the whole, it's the seamlessness of getting from A to B to C where it doesn't always work. And some of the arguing back and forth very much does get tedious for sure. And I was never compelled by the argumentative banter, the romantic conflict, if you will. That I do think is drawn out a little bit too much. But the underlying thematic core, for all the reasons we talked about, that I think stays intact. And that is where it does get really interesting. And why some of that argumentative banter still needs to be there. I just think it maybe it loses, it kind of gets away from itself a little bit at times.
It does. It does get very loosey-goosey by that point. But I do at least appreciate that there are flourishes of, I guess, brilliance. Maybe that's the word I can use. There are flourishes of great moments here, not just in the writing, but also in its directing. There are some shots here that I think are very clever. I don't know if you noticed this, but in the final act, when Me and I Am are their fully realized avatars, no longer animated, when they look at each other and we get those medium close-ups on each of their faces, it looks like there are lights reflected in their eyes, but it actually looks like a mistake. Like for those watching on YouTube, if I lift my head a little bit like this, you can see my ring light through my glasses. It kind of looks like that. And I don't know if that was intentional or not, to kind of showcase the potential, I guess, roboticness of them, that's always going to be there.
I mean, they are living their lives by recreating YouTube videos.
So
like, that's the whole thing of them being in that house.
So
they're just recreating the Deja Liam house and living their life online.
If that was a deliberate choice, that's also kind of brilliant. I have to give.
I think it was.
For that.
Yeah.
Okay. It had to be like that's something you can easily remove in post.
And there's one piece of animation where we see the ring light. Like it's there, it's visible.
That's true. That's a good point. I forgot about that.
So-
Okay. Yeah, it must be deliberate.
I think it was. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to this film that is clever, subtly clever, and really great. Like, again, it's still weird. The logic still doesn't make sense, but man, I don't know. I was kind of moved by it. And I think there's also something like, there again, when you think about the logic and the mechanics of a buoying a satellite, not understanding the passage of time, that's one element. I think I can move past that. Like I said, I kind of enjoy that irony. But for us as the audience watching this, I do think the passage of time and how that is depicted here is a bit moving as well, given the thematic structure of this film, because it is a great reminder that at the end of the day, there's going to be a point where the sun destroys the earth. Like, everyone is going to die. That is the reality of living on this rock. We have a certain amount of time and then it's over. And this film wants to, maybe not so subtly by the end, but it wants to scream to the heavens that your time is precious and this is all going to go away. Do you want to live a life of artificiality? And there's something about that when funneled through the prism of the passage of time that does kind of hit you a little bit at the end.
Sure.
That I kind of enjoyed.
Yeah.
And I think it resonates despite the messiness. I think that's why I was moved in the end.
Well, we talked about this a lot with Mickey 17. Messy movie, but man, earnestness will
Yeah,
get you
it goes
far.
a long way, man.
Especially
It
if, well,
yeah.
I hate to use the word earned because I feel like we overuse that sometimes, but I think it's applicable when you're talking about earnestness can actually feel earned. When I think in both of these cases, especially with Mickey 17, I think that's a more interesting movie. I really love that one. But with a movie like Love Me, yeah, there is still an earnestness to this movie, and it feels like something that both both Sam and Andrew Zuchero feel genuinely compelled to give us. It feels like they're just not making this on the fly. It feels like they have a genuine idea that they want to get off their chest, and they did their best to capture it as best as they could.
I agree. There is an earnestness to this film, a sincerity that I very much did appreciate, and I do love the ambition.
Yeah.
Again, it's another one of those like Mickey 17 that is hard to recommend, but I do think it's better than its 45% in Rotten Tomatoes. I would say that
It's trying things. Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
trying things.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if the Zuccheros are listening or watching this. I hope that they are, because if they are and they made it to the end of this review, Andrew, hello from near your hometown. I actually went to Brandywine Heights High School. Apparently you went to Boyertown. So we're only about like 25 minutes apart. I don't live there anymore, but it's where I grew up. So just feel like I want to throw that out there. It's a weird coincidence, apparently.
Yeah, that is pretty wild.
I know.
Well, pretty crazy. If he reaches out to you, I'm going to be so excited.
I kind of hope so. We'll see. Maybe we should tag him.
Yeah. All right. Well, with all of that said, and I guess final thought, just to reiterate, because we talked a lot. I don't know if I said this or not. Kristen Stewart and Stephen Yeun, really good in this movie.
They're good at their jobs.
Really good.
They're good at their jobs.
I think they're great. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can always email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. All right, we have a review of Mickey 17 that is available. You can go and check that out. Boy, that was a lot of fun. We had a great time talking about Mickey 17. Also, episode 627 earlier in the week, we continued our Best Picture movie series talking about Lawrence of Arabia. That was a great time.
Good movie.
And using my essay on After Sun as inspiration, we talked about the best film shots of the 2020s so far. It's kind of like a little appetizer, because in another month's time, a couple months from now, I think as we get to June, the plan is to do the best of the 2020s so far. We're going to do a top 10. We'll have a show prepared then. So it's a little appetizer kind of leading to that.
Absolutely.
In the summertime. So it was a great time. Go and check that out. A new Women in Session coming out tomorrow. You can be on the lookout for that as well. Okay, with that, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We will see you all next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Give me these ambitious failures.
Love me, say that you love me.